Hey, welcome everybody to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. We have a fantastic show coming up for you tonight. Psychic explorer Mark Anthony is back in the house. Coming up next. Welcome back, everybody, to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker. With me, as always, my co-hostess, Victoria Monday. And down in the chat room, Alina, moderating the chat. We have a great show coming up for you tonight. Our good friend, psychic lawyer, psychic explorer, Mark Anthony, is back with us. He's a renowned psychic medium, has a couple of books out there, and he is a very interesting guy, world traveler. He doesn't just come onto our show to talk about mediumship and all that, which he has before, but like I said, he's a world traveler. He's very interested in all these things going on within our universe. And tonight we are talking about the gates of hell. So, Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, sorry. I couldn't resist.
Inner demon coming out, huh?
Thank you, Mike, Victoria. I really appreciate having me back on the show. We always have a good time. And this is a fascinating topic, the gates of hell.
It is.
Yeah, so it really is. I kind of dug into this a little bit here over the past week since I knew that you were coming on. And, I'd heard something a few years back about, an archaeological discovery and all of that. But, you've done your homework on this. I'm going to throw up a couple of photos here. But this is in Turkey, but it's a Greco-Roman site.
It is.
And, yeah, so it's an interesting location here.
It really is. And, see, when we think of hell, our concept of hell it originated with the oldest religion in the world, which is Zoroastrianism, which comes from modern day Iran. And there were descriptions of eternal damnation and going into a lake of fire. The Egyptians also had something like that. So pretty much most of the belief systems have a destination for the wicked after physical death. We certainly know that in Christianity, good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. And the Greeks and Romans were no exception. And you were correct when you're saying this comes from Eastern Turkey. See, in the ancient Mediterranean world, the country that is now Greece certainly was Greek speaking. But then again, most of what is now Eastern Turkey was essentially part of Greece. And there was a city that they referred to as Hierapolis, which in Greek means the holy city. And the slides that you were showing of the archway going into the ground, that was known as the Plutonium. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yeah, there's the Plutonium, the dreaded gate to hell. And
which is named for the god Pluto, the god of the underworld, correct?
Correct. In Greek, he was referred to as Hades, and in Latin, which was the Roman religion, it was Pluto. And the Greeks and Romans, they shared a lot of cultural similarities, one of which was their religion. And plutonium, interestingly enough, is also one of the most, if not the most lethal substance known to our science. And it's no coincidence that plutonium, the name of the highly radioactive element, derives its name from the plutonium in Hierapolis. I want to talk a little bit about Hierapolis first. It's right near the modern-day Turkish city of Pumukkale. And Pumukkale is a huge tourist destination. There's these incredible underwater fissures that come up, and there's hot springs. So, and to this day, people go swimming in the mineral baths, and the ancient Greeks saw a medicinal quality to these mineral baths. But people would flock there from all over the Mediterranean world. And there were temples to Apollo, the god of the sun, to his sister Artemis, the goddess of the moon, to Zeus, the king of the gods. It kind of was, in a sense, like you might think of the Vatican today. It was a religious epicenter. And so all of the gods, they had their temples there. And Zeus in Greek, he was known as Jupiter in Latin, was the god of the sky. He was the king of the gods. His weapon was the lightning bolt. And his brother Poseidon in Greek, Neptune in Latin, was the god of the oceans and the seas. But the god of the earth and the underworld was Hades in Greek, Pluto in Latin. And Pluto determined who lived and who died. And so people would come to Hierapolis to make sacrifices to the gods. And the ancient Greek philosopher Strabo wrote about the plutonium. So there's this gate to the underworld. Now, we've all heard about gates to hell, like when you die and there's a Christian belief that you go and there's St. Peter and you get judged. And if you're good, you're going up. And if not, you're going down. And to some extent, that was borrowed from the Greco-Roman religion. And Strabo wrote about how the entrance to the plutonium was filled with this dense mist, so thick that you couldn't see, and any animal that passed inside of it met instant death. Now, the Roman senator and philosopher Cicero also visited, and he wrote that any animal that passes inside meets instant death. Bulls are led into it and then dragged out dead. He said, I threw in sparrows, little birds, and they immediately breathed their last and fell. So, Mike and Victoria, I mean, for centuries, people thought that this was, just some type of fairy tale, some fictionalized myth. But there was an archaeologist, an Italian archaeologist, Francesco D'Adria. And the funny thing about Professor D'Adria, he went to Turkey for 2 weeks. Well, he stayed for 20 years.
Kind of the way it goes. Kind of like when you go shopping at the store.
Yeah, he went there. He was interested in this, and when he got to Hierapolis was in what was once called the Kingdom of Phrygia, and Phrygia was a very wealthy and prosperous Greek-speaking kingdom until the Persians came in and flattened it and made it part of the Persian Empire. But at any rate, he became so enamored with Hierapolis, and he has quite a distinguished career. He found the tomb of, I believe it was St. Philip. St. Philip was allegedly one of the disciples of Jesus, and he went to this area to spread the word, the Gospels, and unfortunately he was crucified by the local Greco-Roman religion. And he's entombed there. And so Professor D'Adria found that. And D'Adria was very well versed in Greco-Roman myths and legends. And there was this one area, Mike, that they were working on, and they kept seeing dead birds around these ruins. So they started unearthing this area, and they noticed that any birds that would fly in would immediately drop dead. So Professor D'Adria, he suspected that he found the plutonium. The plutonium had been in Greek and Roman stories, legends, and historical accounts for centuries. And then when the Christianity took over the empire, the Christians bricked it up, and then later on there was an earthquake that filled it in. So they started working on this and clearing it out, and then they found something that just rocked their world. They found a statue almost 5 feet tall of the three-headed hellhound Cerberus right in the mouth of the plutonium. And they were like, yeah, this is it. Now, Cerberus is for those of us, and Mike, I believe you're one of these people, you study cryptozoology. It's hard to do what we do. People think, I'm a medium, so I just talk about spirit communication. But as you described, I've traveled all over the world. I've studied mystical and supernatural phenomenon. And I know that you're a ghost story, and I love the term that you created. Well, it's true.
Thanks.
Because it's a great term. I mean,
it really is. Well, I mean, if we're going to be studying supernatural phenomenon, it involves several different disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, mediums are so focused on just that, which is fine. But I've always been interested in pretty much everything. And archaeology is no different, because if you're going to be studying archaeology, well, certainly you have to know history, but you also have to know geology. You have to know chemistry. You have to know biology. You have to understand physics. And so Cerberus was, and I think most people would recognize Cerberus from Harry Potter and
the first movie.
Stone, Fluffy.
Yeah, Fluffy.
Fluffy, the big three-headed hellhound that was guarding whatever it was guarding. But hellhounds are all throughout mythology, and there's certainly a lot of people who believe that they do exist. And hellhounds are supernatural dogs. They're the mean, nasty dogs. In the movie The Omen, when all those black dogs appeared, the devil's dogs, well, those were hellhounds. It is believed that the Egyptian goddess Anubis, the god of mummification, he was a jackal-headed dog god. He looked like a dog. He was a hellhound, and certainly Cerberus was the biggest, baddest hellhound of them all. And so the Greeks said that anyone who tried to enter the plutonium would be struck down by the foul breath of Cerberus. So the Greeks, according to their religion, when you died is when you died, but you did not descend into the land of the underworld, because there would be consequences to pay. And it was pretty darn scary. I mean, if they could bring bulls in there, and the bulls would collapse and die. And this is all very heavily documented. The question is, why didn't the priests of the Greek religion collapse and die as well? I'll take a sip.
Yeah, and I like I said before the show, I did a little poking around about this particular location, and from my reading, that had to do with the fact that because of where the gases wafted up from, the priests were a little bit taller, just tall enough that they wouldn't inhale it, while the animals were a little bit lower to the ground, which is kind of interesting, because you're talking about science here that maybe they didn't quite understand. Maybe they understood to a certain degree back then.
So it would dissipate, throughout the day.
It
Since
would.
it was denser, it would be there in the morning. So maybe they had that trick up their sleeve.
Oh, you two did do your homework.
A little bit.
Good. Yeah. The foul breath of Cerberus turns out to be carbon dioxide, CO2, because this whole area of the Mediterranean sits above geothermal and volcanic vents. And in fact, the Oracle of Delphi, the Oracle of Apollo, on the other side of the Aegean, also sits upon a geothermal vent, but that's another story. So the thing about carbon dioxide, it's much denser than oxygen, so it falls to the ground. And so, like you pointed out, Mike, the priests were taller, and they also, Strabo noticed that they seemed to be holding their breath because they had these pained expressions when they were coming out, where they bring the animals in who would collapse and die. And also, as Victoria pointed out, that they would do a lot of these rituals during the day, because as the area heated up, it would cause the carbon dioxide to settle closer to the ground. So they may not have understood chemistry, but they certainly understood that there were noxious and poisonous gases that were coming out of the ground. And so they said that this was the breath of Cerberus, who would smite anybody who tried to enter the kingdom of Pluto. And see, we breathe in carbon dioxide all the time. Carbon dioxide, this is a greenhouse gas. This is what everyone's worried about with climate change, because it heats up the atmosphere. But normally, the air that we breathe is 0.039% carbon dioxide. All right, so that's just part of the air. It's harmless.
Yeah.
But if the levels rise to 10% carbon dioxide and you breathe that in, you're going to be dead within 30 minutes. The question is, what caused the instant death? So Professor D'Adria brought in geologists, and they started studying the carbon dioxide levels. And once you're inside the plutonium, and it's a pretty tight space, it's a cave, and then it gets tighter, and it does go very, very deep into the earth. The carbon dioxide levels are 91%. If you breathe that in, you're dead instantly. So while the Greeks may not have understood about gases and noxious fumes, they understood that they existed. So they used to scare the hell out of people from going to hell by using Cerberus as the reason this happened. And the thing is, they used to sell birds, so you could go there, you'd buy birds and throw them in and watch them die. I mean, the Greeks and Romans weren't real big on the value of life. I mean, certainly, we've all seen Gladiator, but and that's probably a watered down version of what they really were doing in the arena, and in that, and certainly animal life was given no value whatsoever. So you would go there, and to worship the god Pluto, you'd buy a bunch of sparrows for a couple drachma, and then you go throw them in there and say your prayers to the god of death, and watch that happen.
Call it a day.
Yeah, I know, it's just pretty morbid.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I noticed when you showed that one photo, it looks like you're looking down, and it's kind of like it almost looks like stadium seating, like when you go to the movie theaters. And I also read that they did sacrifice. Yeah, that one. Did they have like people come and watch sacrifices, or who was doing the sacrificing?
Absolutely. This was big business. Okay, religion has always been big business, and in an ancient world, it was no exception. So people would come, and that's why what Strabo and Cicero, when they saw the priests bring the bulls in, this was because people were all lined up in an amphitheater to watch the bulls be smited. Okay, so this was the entertainment. Let's go watch something die. I mean, the Greeks and Romans were really big on watching something die. And also in the same area, they had a huge amphitheater, which was built, they believe, by order of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, which could actually seat 15,000 people.
Wow.
And get this, they still put on shows there. The Romans were so good with their understanding of acoustics that they could entertain 15,000 people without any form of amplification as we know it. Mm-hmm. So basically, Hierapolis was sort of like the Disney World for the gods, okay? And you took your family and you went on vacation and you did your pilgrimage there, and you could pray to all the gods. You could see some shows, some Greek plays, some Roman comedies and Greek tragedies. You go and you would watch bulls and other animals be shoved into the plutonium and drop dead. And then, also a lot of their festivals would turn into drunken orgies. So I'm sure that, there was a lot of appeal for a lot of people in that way. I never understood how Christianity caught on, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but, it's like in ancient Rome, it's like, oh, we're going to church. Woohoo.
So it was, they were sacrifices basically to keep people in line and for entertainment, not like, oh, you did something and I'm going to punish you and kill you, that kind of thing?
From the research that I've done, I haven't seen that they were actually putting human beings in there.
Okay, now, so it's animals and stuff?
Well, knowing the Greeks and the Romans, I can't say that it never happened, but I didn't come across. Well, it's like you have been judged and you are going to the plutonium. I mean, that would be like, oh my God. On the other hand, I think I'd rather get shoved into the plutonium than thrown into an arena with hungry lions. Okay. Yes.
Probably.
That would be over real quick, as opposed to, lions playing with you and ripping you apart. But, the world's always been a brutal place, and the Greeks and Romans knew it was brutal, but they made it fashionable and spiritual. So,
the fashionably spiritual ripping apart of, limbs. So
And have some wine. Here you go.
and
Yeah.
have some wine. Yes. So, Mark,
Well,
let me ask you something here.
sure.
So there's writing, it's Greek writing above the gate here. Now, a lot of the legend and lore is that above the gates of hell is supposed to be written, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Is that what's supposed to be written here, or is this something else?
That I believe came much later in history. This, the Greeks were looking at the underworld. This was part of life. Death was part of life, and you have to realize that during the Roman era, the average human lifespan was 28 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's not much.
No, it isn't. You hear about, like the Emperor Augustus lived well into his 70s, and people that were older, but they tended to be wealthy and certainly well fed. But this was in a time where the common cold would kill you. They had no defense against diseases. They didn't have anyone telling them to wear masks. They didn't understand what caused diseases. I mean, a lot of people thought diseases were caused by noxious vapors, ergo the plutonium, and that you're being struck down by the gods. So life was very brutal, and so paying respect to the god of death, Pluto, Hades, would certainly have been something that you did. You wanted to venerate this all-powerful god, because their version of the afterlife, they had the Elysian Fields, and that would be what we would call heaven. And then there was Tartarus. Tartarus was the not so nice part of the underworld, and people who were considered evil were tortured. The word tantalize comes from Tantalus, and Tantalus was cast into the deepest pit of the underworld, and he was up to his chest in wine. And so when he would try to drink the wine, it would immediately disappear. And then right above his head, there was all these grapes and fruit, and he'd try to grab them, and they'd always be pulled right out of his grasp. And that's where the word tantalize comes from, because from Tantalus, he was being tortured. Then there's the story of Sisyphus.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah, Sisyphus had to push this stone up this incline, and if he'd get it to the top, I guess, maybe he'd get out of Hades, and it always fell and rolled back down. So for eternity, he was doing this activity. And as Christianity began to overtake the area, a lot of this, even though Christians would deny it, started getting incorporated into the new religion. In my upcoming book, which is coming out in October, I have a chapter where I describe the origin of hell and where it comes from, even where it gets its name. Hell, as we know it, is a synthesis of many different beliefs, from the Zoroastrian beliefs, from the Greco-Roman beliefs. There was a Jewish belief, even though Judaism doesn't have hell, outside of Jerusalem, there's a valley known as Gehenna. And in Gehenna, if you were dishonored, in other words, a criminal, or if you couldn't afford a proper burial, your body was thrown into sulfur pits, which they called fire and brimstone.
Oh.
So in ancient Judea, if you were evil, a sinner, a criminal, what awaited you was fire and brimstone. So when you start looking at the origins of all these, you can see how they got incorporated. Because, how many times have we heard, zealous ministers, there's fire and brimstone and all this.
Right.
And that comes from that tradition. And then meanwhile, on the northern border of the Roman Empire, the Vikings. And, I love reading about the Vikings. I have to admit, I love that show on History Channel, The Vikings. But let me tell you, when the Vikings showed up, there was nothing to love about that. All right, they were a brutal warrior culture. I mean, they were the Klingons, basically. Okay, tear the city apart, rape the women, kill the men, and et cetera.
Call it Saturday night. Yeah.
Yeah. That was Saturday night. Yeah, and they had the god Loki. And Loki was the god of fire and magic and mischief. And the king of the gods, Odin, and his wife Freya, their son Balder was the god of light. And Loki tricked a blind god into smiting Balder with a mistletoe-tipped arrow, and Balder dies. The god of light dies.
Is that where Balderdash comes from?
Could, but Freya goes to the underworld and meets with the goddess of death, whose name was Hel. And on the third day, Balder rose from the dead.
Sound familiar?
Now, this predates Christianity by a good 1,000 years. One can only wonder, and I'm just putting it out there, that this may have had some effect and influence on other religions swirling around the Roman Empire in the first century AD.
But didn't the Egyptians have that same, I'm just going to call it a myth?
Osiris.
Yeah.
Osiris, yeah.
And
Resurrection of Osiris,
God Set and Mother Isis found him, and on the third day he rose. And this appears to be a reoccurring theme throughout religions in the Mediterranean and in European worlds. And Loki sort of got merged with Lucifer, and eventually Hel as a deity dissipated, leaving her name as the destination that you went to if you were bad. Now, for the Vikings, bad people, okay, if you murdered someone, if you outright murdered someone, or if you died cowardly. So if you died in battle, you got to go to their version of hell, which is like a drunken biker fest for all of eternity, because the warriors went. And if you were evil, you went to this dark and dismal realm that we now call hell. And so the Greeks and Romans were in step with all of this. It's just that for them, this was an actual physical place that you can reach by going through this cavern into the underworld. And that's why in our culture, we refer to heaven as being in the sky because you're lifted up, but you go down below, and this is where it comes from. It's from the plutonium. It's from these ancient Greek beliefs that you could actually, hell is a physical place here underneath the earth.
Hey, Mark, we have a question here from one of our chatters, and it pertains to other cultures here. And by the way, just to let our chatters know, Super Chats are back. We got those back last month. So this is from Sarah Falvey. Do we only see these gates within the Greek and Roman cultures? Do we see similar gates with Native American, Asian, and or Celtic cultures?
That's a very good question. I have studied a lot of the Native American cultures, and for them, death is more of a spiritual thing as opposed to going into the earth. Now, with the Asian cultures, I'm not aware of a going into the earth, but the ancient Zoroastrian religion of Persia talked about a lake of fire, as did the Egyptians, and it appears to have been underneath the earth. Now, let's think about this for a minute. In Iran, certainly parts of Egypt, and definitely in the Mediterranean, underneath the earth, a lake of fire, these are all volcanically active areas. So for them, these lakes of fire could be lava, could be magma. Well, magma is lava that hasn't come through the surface yet. So that's where this lake of fire in the underworld comes from. But in other cultures, I'm not aware that all of them are necessarily subterranean the way it is with the Greco-Roman. That's a very good question.
Awesome. And this is kind of an interesting one here from Sarah Youssef. Given the high rates of deaths at those sites, are there high levels of paranormal activity?
Yes. Which is what makes it so fascinating. And that's now bringing me across the other side of the Aegean to the Oracle of Delphi. Apollo was the god of prophecy. And, Apollo, he was like the blonde surfer dude, he had the big muscles. And, he rode his chariot through the sky and brought up the sun. And but he was also the god of prophecy. And the Oracle of Delphi was the Oracle of Apollo, and it was staffed mainly by women, excuse me, the priestess. And they would sit on this tripod above geothermal vents, and they would start to channel, if you will, the god Apollo and give prophecies. And the Greek and Roman scholars who visited these sites, and you got to realize Delphi was an important spiritual epicenter and psychic site, if you would, for 17 centuries. So for 1700 years, people would go to the Oracle of Delphi for advice. And they talk about how the air became very sweet. Well, Delphi sits above a volcanic vent, and the gas ethylene has a very sweet odor, and ethylene can also induce a hallucinogenic type state. So according to legend, that the priestesses, they would sit on this tripod and inhale this supposedly ethylene and start giving prophecies. The thing is, though, a lot of these prophecies were quite accurate. So from that standpoint, there was a lot of paranormal activity going on. If I can share 2 stories about Delphi, would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, around about almost 500 BC, there was this king of what is now Turkey, okay, which would include Hierapolis, okay, and his name was Croesus. And Croesus was very concerned about the rapidly expanding Persian Empire on its eastern frontier. And the Persians were conquering massive amounts of territory. And so he went to the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle said to him, if you attack the Persians, you will destroy a mighty empire. Well, Croesus took that to mean that he needed to launch an attack against the Persians. So he got his allies, even got the Egyptians involved. He got a whole coalition army, and they went at the Persians. Well, the Persians annihilated the army, wiped it off the face of the earth, took Croesus prisoner. I think they executed him. There's varying stories about that, and occupied all of what is now Turkey. So the prophecy came true. Croesus attacked the Persians and destroyed a mighty empire, his own. And so that's why, as a psychic medium, I always tell people, when you get messages or when we receive messages of a prophetic nature, you got to be very careful about jumping to conclusions as to what they mean. Mm-hmm. But then, barely a century later, the Persians had continued their forays against the Aegean world, and they wanted Greece really badly. And so a huge Persian army crossed the Dardanelles, and they were closing in on the city of Athens, and they really wanted Athens because the Athenians were the troublemakers with the Persians. They were stirring everything up, and the Greek city-states, they put together an army, and we've all heard about the 300 at the Battle of Thermopylae. There was a movie a couple of years back, which is really kind of cheesy, but anyway, well,
it's one of my favorites. No.
They got a little too ridiculous. They should have stuck with more of the fact, like the big crab monster. Where did that come from? All right,
so, Ray Harryhausen. Yeah,
yeah. Ray is my hero. So
I love Ray.
But the Athenians went to the Oracle of Apollo, and at Delphi, and the message was, "You'll defeat the Persians. No, Athens will be saved, and you will defeat the Persians from behind wooden walls." Well, the Athenians immediately evacuated the entire city of Athens. The Persians broke through the 300, and they burned Athens to the ground. But the Athenian population had been moved to the island of Salamis. Now, the Persians had a massive fleet, and they assembled it, and they were closing in. But the Greeks had a really good fleet, nowhere near as big as the Persians. But the Greek admiral laid a trap, and he drew them into a narrow channel. And all of a sudden, the big clunky Persian ships couldn't maneuver, and they all started running into each other and running aground. And then the Greeks, from a safe distance, started picking them off with catapults, with flaming projectiles, and they burned the Persian fleet and completely destroyed it. Meanwhile, on the mainland of Greece, the united Greek armies under Spartan command at the Battle of Marathon decisively defeated the Persians. But the prophecy came true. Athens would be saved and the Persians would be defeated from behind wooden walls, which the Athenians correctly interpreted as ships. Mm-hmm. Ships are made of wood. And that's why they got everybody out of Athens, got them on the island of Salamis, and knew that their wooden walls, their navy, was going to be used, was their salvation. So it's really interesting when you start looking at these ancient prophecies. And this isn't like in the Iliad or the Odyssey. This is history. This is what was being written down, and that's what happened. So yeah, there's a lot of paranormal activity in the ancient world.
Well, that's fantastic, Mark. We got deep into some fascinating history there, and one of the questions that came from Betty Lange was if you had been to some of these sites, and I didn't scroll it far enough to get her question to put it on the screen. But,
I've yet to go to Hierapolis. Been to a number of sites in Italy, certainly France, England, Central America, South America, Asia, and in Southeast Asia. And that's why I'm known as the Psychic Explorer. It's funny because both my brands, Psychic Lore and Psychic Explorer, I was dubbed those by media. I remember when I first started, my book Never Letting Go was just come out, and I was somewhere and I was on some show and the guy introduced me. He's the psychic lawyer, and I was like, because I'm an attorney and a psychic medium, and it stuck. And then I was somewhere else and I was describing some supernatural phenomenon that I'd studied in South America, and they start calling me the Psychic Explorer. So these terms have stuck, but that's what I've been doing my whole life. Is I love to study these things and then go see them and then see what I feel. The United States is loaded with great sites. I mean, certainly paranormal investigations and haunted locations. But if you go to places like Sedona or Grand Mesa, and the Hononaki ruins outside of Sedona to see some of the ancient Native American dwellings. It's really amazing when you see the Native American language carved into the rock face, and we don't know how to interpret this yet. I was with a guide, and he was like, well, they don't know if it's a language. I go, of course it's a language. I said, look at it, okay? And, it had a number of what they call petroglyphs, which are representations. I mean, it's like hieroglyphs like I have on that stele back there. The Native Americans were no less clever. And I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second.
Oh, go right ahead.
It's funny because Mike.
No, we love hearing your story. So go ahead. What's that, Victoria?
We were just talking about all those places right before Mark joined us.
We were talking about Sedona and a lot of the Southwest United States. So,
well, all right. I've been to Peru. I've been to Central America. I've been to the Hononaki ruins all over the Southwest, and I've also been up in Canada and in the Cape Cod region where the Pilgrims landed. And there's something that every Native American nation did, from Canada to Argentina. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, planted together as seeds. They help each other grow, they perpetuate each other, and they became the staple foods in Native American civilizations throughout the entire New World. Now, how is it that they all knew to do this? It would indicate that there must have been a lot of trade, a lot of travel, and a lot of interfacing between these different cultures, because somebody figured this out. And, to this day, it's like, the shade of the squash leaves protect the beans, and then the corn grows, and then the beans can grow there, and they don't choke each other out. And let me tell you, the Europeans, the English, were going to starve until the Native Americans, much to their demise, taught them how to do this. So I found that very, very interesting, how the corns, beans, and squash, you put them all in the same hole, plant them, you're going to have three different crops that are not only going to keep you alive, but going to give you a surplus. And that's the whole basis of a civilization, is when you stop hunting, gathering, and start cultivating. So anyway, that's an observation that I made. And maybe I'll get around to writing something and doing more research on it. But I always found that very, very fascinating. When we study archaeology, we all want to get the Tomb of Tutankhamun. We want the gold, we want the treasure, the whole Indiana Jones stuff. But you got to get to, how did these people get to that level? And you've got to have an infrastructure. You've got to have cultivation. You've got to have food on a regular.
I thought it was aliens.
Well, that too. That's my daughter and I moved to this house right before the pandemic, like the day before. And so container gardening was something everyone was doing. And they're doing exactly what you were talking about, mixing the three types of plants together in one container. And that's something we've always done. We've always had plants out there, and you always know your tomatoes and your marigolds grow together because the marigolds keep the bugs away and the tomatoes grow real big. So, it's coming back.
Yeah.
Okay, that was it.
So we had a question in here, a little bit of a different topic, but it's from Sarah Falvey. Does your psychic abilities help your legal career, or has it created barriers for you? It's a little bit of a personal question here.
Yes. First off, I'm no longer practicing law, but I do appear on many shows as a legal analyst in high-profile cases. I become the media's go-to guy when the legal system and the paranormal collide, which actually happens quite a bit more than you might think, especially when you hear people like, I'm possessed by devils, and that's why I did this, which is actually an outgrowth of the insanity defense. But when I was practicing law full-time, absolutely, my abilities were part of my skill set. It came in particularly handy during jury selection.
Yeah.
Job selections too, because we used to analyze handwriting. They would pass it to me. Oh no, he's got the serial killer D. We can't hire him.
Well, yeah. Picking up on things on people, and like there's this one trial that I was doing, and it was a battery charge, and my client, he was a big bruiser, and he got in a fight with another big bruiser. It was barroom brawl, mutual combat, but it was still a crime of violence, and I was defending him. And so the prosecutor, we're at jury selection, which is before you start taking evidence. And it's interesting because the officer that is charged with the murder of George Floyd, his jury selection started today. So this is kind of a time topic, I guess. And so we got the prospective jurors, and I kept zeroing in on this one woman, and I kept feeling this clamping around my throat. I couldn't breathe, and I kept feeling a female energy, a female spirit around her. So I knew that there was somebody connected with her, had some type of obstruction with her breathing prior to passing. And so when I stand up to do my section of the jury selection, which is known as voir dire, or where I went to law school in Georgia, voir dire, I asked the jury, and this is very standard in a crime of violence. Have you, or has anyone in your family ever been a victim of a violent crime? Lo and behold, the woman that I kept getting drawn to raises her hand, and she begins to tremble. And I'll never forget this. The tears just start streaming out of her eyes. And
wow.
She said, a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, dismembered her body, and threw her in the garbage like trash. And I'm standing there, I'm all of like 26 years old, this is like, I'd just gone and worked for this defense firm, and everyone's looking at me like, do something. And I can hear my client like, dude, what are you doing? And then I'm starting to see her sister's spirit come in. And then I understand why I'm feeling the clamping in my throat. Literally, I had a foot in both worlds. And if you want to find out what happens, you have to get my book, Never Letting Go.
Okay, so my list too. Hey, let me ask you a question real quick. My degree is in broadcasting, and right before I graduated, they said, one thing you might want to look into is entertainment law. Is paranormal law do you think that's going to be something we can work our way into?
Well, there certainly is, and both of you would be interested in this. There is ghost hunter liability, and there are certain insurance companies who are issuing policies for ghost hunters when you're doing a paranormal investigation. Now, immediately you think, well, does that cover me if I get possessed by devils? Well, let's be a little bit more practical with this. I don't think insurance policies cover acts of God or demons, but
maybe not.
Maybe not. But okay, you're running around in an abandoned house at night, and somebody falls down the stairs and breaks a leg.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Doesn't it make sense for you to get a liability policy before you do this?
Well, normally you sign a disclaimer or a waiver.
Well, there have been cases where I've been consulted, on where I had to comment, where people claim that the ghost hunters actually agitated the spirits that are said to be lurking in their house and made things worse. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know how you would possibly prove that in a court of law, but it certainly makes for a good segment on a news program. But I don't know if there's going to be so much paranormal law. I think it's basically going to be broadening the parameters of insurance and liability coverage is what it would appear to be.
Okay. Interesting.
All right. So, Mark, we got about 15 minutes left in the show. I know there was one other topic that you wanted to go ahead and talk about, and that was the Loch Ness monster. And, we all know about Nessie, but you told us before the show that there's some new information emerging about our famous Loch Ness monster. So let's take a look at good old Nessie here. There she is. So what can you tell us about what's going on with Nessie?
Yeah, well, I've actually spent time at Loch Ness, and if you ever go to Scotland, you got to go to Loch Ness. And, every time you hear a splash in the water, you look like, oh my God. That photo that you brought up, Mike, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's the 1934 photo, and it's called the surgeon's photo because Dr. Robert Wilson, who was a surgeon, took it. Well, that hit the British press big time. Probably even bigger than Meghan and Harry's interview. But
that's because Oprah wasn't there. That's all.
It depends on which side you're on. Which monster are we talking about? Anyway. But as it turned out, Dr. Wilson admitted that was a hoax. It was a rubber head that he stuck on a toy submarine that he bought at Woolworths. And they took a photo of it, and people have analyzed it. They could see that, the ripples in the water are not consistent with that. And so the thought became that the Loch Ness monster could possibly be a plesiosaur, which is a dinosaur that looks something like the mock-up. The thing, though, about Loch Ness is that reports of Nessie, of sightings of the Loch Ness monster, go back as far as 565 AD. So we're talking 1,500 years ago. And it's an interesting story of an Irish missionary who became known as St. Columba. And he was at Loch Ness, and supposedly this monstrous creature bit somebody that was swimming, and St. Columba jumped in the water and told him to get back, and it did. Well, so these sightings have gone on and on for centuries. And, once again, people think that it's a plesiosaur, a dinosaur that got trapped there. But what recently, Kongsberg Maritime, and it's a marine institute from Norway, they decided to look for Nessie by using an underwater drone. And this was really cool because they went really deep and they found something absolutely astonishing.
Now, can the drone see? Because it's so dense and dark down there, isn't it?
Well, it was using infrared. And they found at the bottom of Loch Ness a giant wooden mock-up of the Loch Ness monster that was used in a 1969 Sherlock Holmes movie. And it was made by none other than Wally Vevers, who is a legend in special effects movies. In fact, he worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey. He did these
nice
effects for that. So they didn't find a dinosaur, but they certainly found a wooden mock-up of it, and which was really fascinating. But you got to realize Loch Ness is a pretty big lake. It's 22 miles long. It's 1.5 miles wide and 800 feet deep. Now that's a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
So logically, the answer to the mystery lies in the water. And a retired chemist, Professor Henry Bauer from Virginia Polytechnic, he's now 89. He believes, based on other photographs that have been taken, that the Loch Ness Monster very well could be a form of a sea turtle, large turtles that may have been trapped at Loch Ness after the last ice age when the ice caps receded. But more recently, Nick Jamil, and he's from the University of Otago in New Zealand, he decided to test the water itself. And so Professor Jamel and his team of New Zealand marine biologists began analyzing the water, and they found over 3,000 different species DNA. Now, what they didn't find were sharks. They didn't find sturgeon DNA, but what really rocked their world, they found massive, and they were astonished, massive amounts of eel DNA.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So now,
possibly giant eels, maybe?
Very possibly giant eels. And they said you don't have to be a marine biologist. They say every 10-year-old boy's caught eels at Loch Ness. Okay. But here's another curveball to throw in here. 20% of the DNA samples they've found is unexplainable. They don't know what it is.
It's
all right, it's always nice to have that. So it could be a giant eel. Generally, though, the type of eels that live in the lakes in Scotland get about 4 to 5 feet long. But if it's a giant eel, it could be much deeper. And he said, Professor Jamil said, it appears that they're looking at something much, much larger. Now, we're back to the plesiosaur. They said, well, there's no dinosaur DNA. Well, how do you know? Have we ever found dinosaur DNA? Of course not. In a plesiosaur...
No, we would have Jurassic Park right now if we did.
Yeah. Which, the little kid in me's like, yeah, and then it's like you see the movie. I love where Jeff Goldberg is like in the second or third when he goes, then there's the screaming and they're running.
Oh, yeah.
Well, are there any underwater caves or anything they could like slip off in? Like, a submarine?
Well, that's possible, but Loch Ness it's fresh water, so it's separate from the ocean. But that does mean that there's still not some type of subterranean connections there. Another theory, the psychologists have said that the massive sightings of Loch Ness could be due to what's known as a phenomenon called expectant attention. And that's when you really want to see something so bad and you expect to see it that you begin to misinterpret visual clues. And, I have to admit, when I was at Loch Ness, every time the water would splash, it's like, I just, I really wanted to see something, but unfortunately we didn't. On the other hand, if 20% of the DNA is unexplained, and I'm not saying that it's a plesiosaur, but archaeologists have unearthed skeletons, or rather the fossilized remains of them, of plesiosaurs in Scotland. So, 65 million plus years ago, plesiosaurs were in the area. But whether or not Nessie is a plesiosaur or collection thereof, it remains to be seen. My money is on the eels, and it makes sense. Eels, slippery, slimy, they're going to come up for a minute. They have that whole sea serpent-y look. I think that's probably the most logical answer. But then again, and Mike and Victoria, you know this as well as I do, whenever investigating the unusual and the so-called unexplainable, The lack of evidence does not mean the absence of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is true, and we continuously find, additional, in new life forms in our deep parts of the ocean. There's plenty that we have yet to discover down there, and as we keep sending probes down, the little robotic drones and what have you, they keep finding all kinds of fascinating life forms, especially like around our thermal venting and what have you. So I always leave that possibility open that there could be things out there that we still don't have an answer for because we haven't found them yet.
Well, recently, in fact, this January 2021, there was another sighting of Loch Ness monster, Nessie, and it's from a surveillance camera which is on the castle. Sorry, I forget the name of the castle. But they show something very large that comes up surfaces and then kind of sinks back down. And there's a report of some people that were in a boat and their sonar. When you go deep sea fishing or I guess deep lake fishing, they picked up an object directly below their boat in about like 50 plus feet of water that appeared to be 33 feet long. So something's there.
Wow. What would they do if it rose up underneath them?
Well, I've been out in pretty big and nasty things have surfaced nearby, and what you do is not irritate it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. You don't want something coming out of the water, or like maybe, I don't know, eating you, or maybe at least taking off an arm. You don't want that.
No,
not a good day.
And I don't want to say like my dad taught me. My dad was a Navy SEAL, and he taught me that sharks are not monsters. He said they belong there. Okay, and he said you have to respect them. And let me tell you, I've learned, growing up on the ocean and diving and coming into contact. I mean, next time I'm on the show, I'll tell you about my octopus encounter. But
there we go.
Yeah, it was a big one. Yeah, so Loch Ness definitely is going to continue to captivate our imagination. It may be an eel, but there's still that 20% of unexplainable DNA. And when I was at Loch Ness, I remember talking to some of the locals, and I love the Scots. They're just great people. And I said, don't you wish they'd find it? And this one guy, and he was, we were all drinking. We were drinking Scots whiskey, and he goes, no. He goes, it'd be bad for business.
Right, because once I have an answer, nobody's going to come up there anymore. So yeah,
exactly. Why go? I mean, other than the fact that it's breathtakingly beautiful, the Scottish Highlands are just amazing.
Yeah.
But the Scots were like, no, we like the mystery. We want there to be a monster. And I was like, a what? A monster?
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Mark, we are getting down to the end of the show here. We have your website there underneath on the ticker, evidenceofeternity.com. So everybody, please go ahead, check that out. There was a nice comment in here for you from Tammy Pennington. Mark is amazing. I've been in 2 group readings with him, and he is always spot on with what is going on with me. So thank you, Tammy.
Well, thank you, Tammy. And everybody, I'm going to invite everyone to tune in to my show. I co-host the show with Dr. Pat Basili, The Psychic in the Doc, this Thursday. And I have a very special guest, the one, the only, Mike Ricksecker. Yeah, Mike.
Oh, me. Oh, yeah.
That would be you, Mike. Yeah. And that if you go to my website, evidenceofeternity.com, and you go to the calendar of events, it'll show you how you can tune into the show. And Mike's going to be talking about his groundbreaking, cutting-edge book, A Walk in the Shadows. He's going to talk about his life and work as a paranormal investigator. There it is.
There it is.
And if you want to share your paranormal experience or get Mike's take on your encounter with the shadow people, we're welcoming callers. So I'm really looking forward to having Mike Ricksecker as my guest on The Psychic in the Doc this Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Always great to talk to you, Mark, here and on your podcasts and shows as well. So, anything else you want to share? You have a new book that's going to be coming out. Do we have an expected date for that?
My publisher told me the anticipated release date is Tuesday, October 5th of this year. And I'm very excited. We'll be releasing more details about that. And I'm going much deeper into explaining the scientific basis for spirit communication, near-death experiences, deathbed visions, and visitations. Because my research has indicated that there is a common denominator between all of them, because a mystery is simply a question for which we do not yet have the answer, but we will, and I believe I do.
Oh, it sounds
Fantastic.
amazing.
Sounds exciting. Yeah. So we'll definitely have to grab that in October. So we'll have you back on the show so you can promote it.
Oh,
Yeah, that would be great. I look forward to it. Well, thank you, and everybody. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's always fun for me to work with Mike and Victoria. It feels like we're just sitting around a table virtually, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
we are.
Virtual, a virtual Scottish whiskey, talking about Nessie and hell. But the thing is, I really appreciate you having me on and giving me a forum to discuss some of my adventures, and I enjoy being able to share them. Many blessings.
Absolutely, my friend. Always a pleasure having you on.
Oh, it's fun to talk to you, Mark.
All right. Have a great night. All right. There we go. Mark Anthony. Always a pleasure having him on, like we said. And there is his website, once again, evidenceofeternity.com. Be sure to check that out. We'll get to the shout outs here for everyone. It's always appreciated that you guys had some fantastic questions down there in the chat. A lot of great commentary, a lot of people in the house this evening. So let's get
good.
to, I'm trying to get over here to the YouTube section where we have the participants tab.
Well, I don't want to
So, of
brag,
course-
but I vacationed
Go ahead.
in hell a couple of years ago. I just want to say that. It's in the Caymans. Hell. It's a real
Oh,
place.
okay.
Yeah.
It is a real place.
It is a real place in the Caymans. I vacationed in hell. So
You vacationed in that? Well, I mean, somebody
Yeah.
has to.
it was really pretty.
Is it?
It actually
check
really
it out.
is. Yeah. You can take a passport and it says, I've been to hell, and they'll stamp it for you.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank Alina for helping out down in the chat, being our chat moderator again this evening. So let's get to the participants tab and give those shout outs. We got Annie Coco in the house this evening. There's Kathy Salento. Thanks for joining us once again. Empath Medium, thanks for joining us this evening. There's Guiding Echoes. Oh, that's Nicole Guillaume. Always great to see her down there, of course. Donna Liska is in the house. Helen Espinoza, thanks for joining us once again. Jill Nimchinsky, thank you as always. There's Katie Palmer and Lenora Martinez. Mueller Family 7 Show, thanks for joining us tonight. And the Haglin. And I know there are plenty more people than that. I don't know why the participants tab is so skimpy this evening, but let's see. What?
You see who I see?
Yep, Adam Tiller is lurking, of course. He's always lurking.
Yes.
So
Happy
let's
belated
see.
birthday, Adam, by the way.
Yes. Adam just had a birthday. So,
Mhm.
happy birthday, Adam. Let's see. Did I get Katie Palmer? I don't know if I did. So, Katie Palmer. Tammy Pennington, thank you for joining us as well. I'm just kind of scrolling up through the... Sarah Falvey, thanks for the questions tonight. And let's see. There's Des Hernandez was in the house. I know Betty Lange was in there earlier. Was Haunted Road Media's Fairy Queen Diane Hilbert? She's usually in there. And Sarah Youssef was around, of course. Let's see. And I think that I'm going to go ahead and scroll back down. If I missed you, I do apologize. We try to get everybody. There's EEQQ. All right. Stacy Comiskey, great to see you. And I think that is going to do it for this evening. All right. So, Victoria, another
Mike?
great round with Mark. So
Oh my
always
God,
a
he's
pleasure
so
having him
fun.
on the show. I know he is. He has so much knowledge. It's always fun to pick his brain.
Oh yeah. It always ties into something,
It does.
He's great. Mhm.
And he is. So, Victoria, have a great night. Oh, I do need to tell everybody for Beyond the Shadows this week, for those that are a part of the Connected Universe, which is the link that I have at the bottom down there right now to watch the live stream of the Beyond the Shadows show. I actually have scheduled on a Wednesday night tomorrow at 8 o'clock, which is usually when we do Beyond the Shadows now. I'm going to be on another show, Rob Parnell's show up in Canada. So that was scheduled months ago before I changed the date of Beyond the Shadows. So I'm pushing Beyond the Shadows this week to Thursday night after I'm on with Mark to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. So check out the show with Mark at 7. Get yourself a drink or whatever, and then come back for Beyond the Shadows at 8:30.
So just order a pizza and stay in. Is that what you're saying?
There you go. Order a
Okay.
pizza and hang out all night. So
That sounds good. Yeah. Have
All
fun.
right, so-
Yeah. I'll be
yeah,
tuning
it'll
in.
be a lot of fun. It'll definitely
Yeah.
be a lot of fun.
Mhm.
So, all right, everybody have a great night.
Night.